Hello and welcome back to OmniFoot TV. This is your host Omar speaking, and tonight's video is an interesting one. We do not necessarily pay attention to the impact the media has on us as football fans. Now, apart from the fact that we basically spend most of our time, especially during the transfer window, be it in January or right now, scrolling through our phones like madmen, trying to find out who's going where, who has the potential to go where, whose agent is talking out of their, behinds, just so I don't demonetize this video for future references, about how said player isn't happy in said club. Whatever the hell that we see online, for the most part, adds this dopamine rush into our brains, be it that we support said club or don't. And it's just this mixed bag of things. It's optimism coupled with pessimism, nihilistic senses and sensibilities here and there. And then you have, the bleak nature of the financial and economic juggernaut that the sport has become. And it's not just about the transfer window. Look, we're seeing it everywhere. But at the same time, we don't really pay attention to it. The foreign investment that has made its way into our game is insane. It is all over the board. And that's the thing. We pay attention to clubs like PSG because of the Qatari money behind them. We pay attention to clubs like Manchester City because of the Emirati money behind them. We pay attention to clubs like Manchester United, not necessarily because of the Glaziers and how crappy they've been for the sake of the club. I'm really having a hard time holding my tongue here. But because of the Qatari money that could be going into the club. And the list goes on, albeit it is a short one, and I've covered this to an extent in different contexts throughout multiple videos that I've made ever since I've started this channel. Here, today, at this very moment, we look at the sport and we think it is going to hell. Okay? We can't necessarily make heads or tails of what's happening, but that's because we don't necessarily see the whole picture. Now, if people were to look at football back in the 70s, or to talk to people who have been following the sport since then, who are alive, healthy, and well, God bless them, they'd hear the phrase football is dead multiple times over. Now, why is that? Because of the amount of money that's been pumped into the game. That's the usual answer you get. But it's not really that simple. It has become a spectacle. It really has. And it's become financially driven to proportions that we possibly didn't foresee. It's moving very fast. And we're hearing terms like sports washing, which I don't really know. I don't necessarily know what that term means. Just, admitting ignorance at least is going to help me a little, because credibility is an important thing, right? I'll probably read up on that later. But anyways, we have clubs in La Liga, for instance, who have foreign investors. Clubs like Valladolid, clubs like Verona, clubs like Sevilla, who have foreign shares. There are clubs like Valencia as well. And for a lot of those clubs, it's not necessarily going as well as it should. There are also foreign investors in the Segunda division in Spain. And I found that out today because Javier Tebas, the La Liga president, had an in-depth interview with the Athletic in the HQ, in their headquarters in Madrid. And he starts talking about how he's trying to control the financial management behind the league and its clubs. He's trying to sort of limit it, to provide, I'm not going to say sanctions, but to provide these walls, these ceilings of sorts, to make sure that players don't have as much in terms of money. Because in the Premier League, for example, and he kept referencing the Premier League, he says it's nothing like it is in England, and we don't want it to be that way. And people look at this and they're like, oh, we didn't necessarily know that Spain had this much foreign investor work present in the country. They didn't have this foreign investor fingerprint present in the league. And it's not that investors aren't necessarily welcomed in Spain. It's just that he's trying to run it differently. Now, Tebas isn't necessarily someone I like. I'm not talking about him in particular because I think that he's a great president or a bad one. I'm not necessarily in either boat, because I don't follow La Liga as religiously. And I think fans who watch this channel or watch any other channel related to La Liga more so would know better than I do on that front. So I'm just going to talk about this. The fact that a league's president has come out and had this interview sparks my interest for multiple reasons. How far forward should we be looking as football fans to think that the sport can't possibly just improve, that we're just diving into this black hole? It's like, hey, maybe it'll get better later on. Maybe it's just a cycle. To me personally, it is a cycle because there's a sense of evolution here. The money being pumped in isn't the only tool. You can't pump money into a club and expect it to just grow. It's not a plant. You have to do much more than that. And even when it comes to plants, you don't just water it and wait for it to grow unless it's in the right conditions. And that falls forward towards everything else in life. If you don't know what you're doing, if you're not scouting players well enough, if you're not looking to balance your books in a proper manner, if you're not making sure that the revolving door of players and staff in your club is being taken care of and balanced out, because that's just as important, if you're not making sure to pay attention to the trends present in tactical evolution of the game, the trends present in the football director's role as well, which has become much more important. People, back in the day at least, as far as my research goes, people paid attention to managers, assistant managers, and both of them would just, they'd scan the board. They'd scan and scale and just move forward with finding the right players required for the right positions, building their teams up, and finances weren't necessarily as big an aspect as they are now. That's looking at it in the context of the current times we're in. Not back then, because I can't necessarily tell at the moment. I haven't done my research on that front, but all I know is it was much more liberal in a sense. We'll use that word, not in a political manner, so just don't go there, please. But my point here is, after everything I've just said, it takes good management. You can come in and buy a club and manage it into the ground. And we've seen that from many rich owners, be it in England, in Spain, in Italy, wherever. I mean, Inter are owned by a Chinese conglomerate that is backed by the US to a certain degree. And you have the Glaziers at United. You have FSG as well at Liverpool. And it's like, hey, PSG are owned by Qatar. Football's just, it's gone down the drain now. The reason these clubs like Man City, won the treble is because they were able to adapt. They were able to create history by building a proper business model based around the times that we're in. They managed to do something that other clubs weren't really focused on doing. And in my humble opinion, what they've done should be studied, because the season that they've had has been brilliant on all fronts, despite the fact that Sheikh Mansour doesn't necessarily like to indulge in the sport of football in a live form. He doesn't really like the sport, it seems. And that's okay, because he's running the business properly. You can love the sport all you want, but if you're not ready to find a way to run your club in a proper manner, it will just fall flat on its face. And we've seen that happen with multiple clubs for a myriad of reasons. It's not just the money that comes in. People look at it and think to themselves, and react to these comments and flood the platforms that we follow and pay attention to on social media with all sorts of senseless nonsense. Well, that's a nice tongue twister. And it bothers me to a degree because it takes a lot more work. Whenever I, as a Chelsea fan, for example, seem to or try to look at the problems that we have as a club, most of it does not have anything to do with money. It's interesting. A lot of teams in the Premier League are owned by, fairly wealthy gentlemen that are not from the country. And the same can be said about a lot of clubs across the world. And the same can also be said about certain clubs that are under an umbrella of the same ownership, which has become a bit of a trend throughout the past decade or so, with the City Football Group being the main example that I can give you. Now, again, to say that we as fans are worried now, we are. Are we desensitized by the amount of money flowing into our game? Yes. Are we desensitized by the way the sport is evolving tactically? Maybe a little, because it's not as personality-based as it used to be. But that will change. Times will change. And like I've said once before, the only way to even out the board is to bring in enough money, to bring in enough people who have that amount of money stacked up, and see who manages it better. Because it is all about the management. And I really just want to know what you think about everything I've said in that front, on that regard, at least, because this has been bothering me today. I've found out that the Saudi Public Investment Fund apparently is a investor of sorts behind Chelsea's ownership. They have a sort of relationship with the Chelsea ownership, and it's an interesting one. And I think more of that is bound to pop up the more you look at things. But it shouldn't necessarily matter in that sense because, again, the business needs to be done correctly. And people seem to just not focus on that. It's not if you don't have enough money, you won't evolve. It's that if you don't evolve, you won't be making enough money to ensure that the evolution continues on a consistent basis. If you don't try to evolve and move and get with the times, like they say, you will be left behind. And you can't blame the money that's coming into your club at that point in time. You can't blame the owners as long as they're, not directly linked with what's happening. And there have been clubs like Almeria, who are run by Turki Al-Sheikh in Spain, who are revolting in a sense or protesting that his ownership hasn't necessarily brought them the kind of improvement that they were waiting for. That's because a lot of people seem to be clueless about the sport. I'm not necessarily saying that he is as an owner, but I just gave this one example because there's more of that in Spain as well. Sure, Spanish football is not like English football, but there's more here than meets the eye, and people should pay attention to that. And that's all I have to say on that front for this video. I've used that term a lot today because it's been that important. It's been that crucial to me to just talk about this because no one else seems to be talking about it. And, I'd really like to know what you think about this, so just leave a comment in the comment section. I will get to it. I want to know if you agree with anything I've said, if you disagree with anything I've said, if you see things from a different perspective that I could actually learn from, that we could all benefit from. Please don't hesitate. Leave me that comment, and I will get to it, and we will have that discussion. Excuse me. Leave a like on the video. Subscribe to the channel. Please and thank you. And I will see you next time the whistle blows. Cheers, everyone. Thank you for watching.